sadly, but there is.
Bad news.
Thanks, Joe. How's that? So welcome. We're so glad to have you with us this afternoon. We're here today, Alki UCC, United Church of Christ, and our project Homeward Bound, a home for every family. We're here today. We have a panel discussion. We provided 5 professionals from the field of homeless services, family homeless services as well. And we're hoping that they can provide for us today information, education, provocation. They can incite us perhaps to a riot. Maybe they can move us to become active members towards a solution. Why we're here with Homeward Bound is we're participating with the larger project with the Gates Foundation and Seattle University. The project's called Faith and Family Homelessness. We're working alongside 14 other congregations, synagogues, and mosques with the very simple, immediate goal of ending family homelessness. So we hope that what we do today, what we hear today, is part of that project. And as far as our small congregation is concerned, helping us to commit to a larger, long-term, sustainable ministry to end family homelessness. So we're grateful you're here today. We're looking forward to what we can learn from our guests as well. We are being filmed. Joe April has graciously offered that service for us back here. So if there's something about that you don't want to be filmed, let us know afterwards and we'll work with that. So I think what I'd like to do is, it's a pretty simple format. I'm going to introduce our 5 guests today. And then after that, we're going to direct our attention to the film screen. So you guys are in these big chairs. You're going to have to find a way to turn them on. Just stay in front here. And we're going to watch an 11-minute clip from a brief newscast that was done during the holiday season. And then we're going to allow them to bring their expertise to the challenges presented within that clip. Then also invite all of you to bring your questions, your concerns, what your thoughts may be, and hopefully, again, just to inform and educate and to mobilize us to deal with this issue. So I think I'll just start by introducing our panelists at this time. We're very glad that you guys were able to give up your Sunday afternoon on a holiday. We recognize as well. So thank you for being here. Let's just start this down here. Chris Meinkohl, he's a housing manager with Broadview Domestic Violence Shelter. And what I'd like you, if Chris could just very quickly, just each of you will tell us what your agency services they provide, the population they serve, what it has to do with family homelessness, and then your role within that.
Okay. I work for Broadview, which is part of Solid Ground, which is a bigger umbrella agency. And that agency does everything from food and housing, advocacy. It's a big, broad agency. Broadview's role in that is we have a shelter and transitional program. So we serve 31 families. They're all women-headed households. The shelter is 100% domestic violence, and our transitional one's about 90% domestic violence. So there's 10 in the shelter, 21 in transitional. The shelter stay used to be about 8 weeks. Now it's being adjusted because of some other stuff, but the transition is about a year. And in that time, we provide on-site drug and alcohol counseling, parenting, financial education, general advocacy for the children. We have tutoring programs and outreach in schools. We've got a mental health program for our kids now. That's what we do. And my role is I'm a housing manager, and then do a little bit of do the scheduling, bring families in. Yeah, including outside agencies.
Thank you, Chris. Next, we have Jillian Park, who is Program Director, Catholic Community Services, there at Sacred Heart Shelter.
Hi, I'm Jillian, and I'm the director over at Sacred Heart Shelter. We're part of Catholic Community Services, which, a lot like Solid Ground, does a lot of different social service providing. At Sacred Heart, we serve families that are homeless and single women that are homeless. We serve 1- and 2-parent families and multi-generational families, including single fathers and teenage boys, which is something relevant to the video that we're going to see. Our focus is really to help people establish the next steps. Where are they going to go from our shelter program? And so we do resident-focused case management services, have a financial advocate and a nurse and a counselor and a CD person who come in on site to help people address the other facets besides the financial that arise with the families that we serve over at Sacred Heart.
Shannon, could I add a comment?
Please, ma'am.
May I?
Sure.
several years ago, Jillian was pretty regularly attending Alki UCC, and like many people, get involved in other things and stuff. So I chuckled when I saw her name on the list. I was delighted when I saw her face in worship. And as we both agreed, God moves in mysterious ways, but she was really glad to be back with us in worship today. So church people, I would really like it if you would extend a very warm welcome and tell her that you'll see her next Sunday.
We hope to see all of you next Sunday.
That's right. And all of you, exactly. But I'm just saying, this was God's good. No, thank you.
No problem.
It's so good to see you. So good to see you.
Thank you, Jillian. Next, we have Liz McDaniel. She's Program Director at Mary's Place Day Center.
Yeah, so Mary's Place is a day center for homeless and formerly homeless women and children. We started out as just a day center back in the early 90s, working to provide a safe place, a safe refuge for women and their children during the daytime, where they could take showers, have 2 healthy meals a day, get access to clothing, health care, employment and education and housing resources. Over the last 4 years, we've seen the quickly rising trend in family homelessness and felt the need to reach out and to do something. And over the last 18 months have started 3 different emergency family shelters, 2 that are for women and children and 1 that are for 2-parent households. Those 2 of them are completely volunteer run, and I'll talk a little bit more about them and ways that your church can even get involved, but most of them are run and volunteer based through faith communities like yours. And our 3rd one is one that just opened in downtown Seattle. That's a strictly an emergency tonight. I'm sleeping in my car, I need somewhere to go kind of shelter for women and children. My role there is probably like everybody else up here. I do a little bit of everything, doing intakes with families, reaching out and connecting to other agencies so that we can partner and best serve the families that we see today.
Next is Allison Howard. Allison Howard is Housing Case Manager in King County Adult Drug Diversion Court, and I should also recognize Allison as my coworker. So,
Thank you everybody for having us today. It's really exciting to hear that your community is interested in getting involved in such an important issue. Like Shannon said, my name is Allison Howard. I'm the Housing Case Manager at the Drug Court. I work with Shannon very closely. And Drug Court is a program within the criminal justice system for folks who have committed a drug felony. And they are offered an option to complete treatment in our very rigorous program in lieu of incarceration. We provide a variety of services for drug and alcohol treatment, mental health, housing, employment, all kinds of services, and we have very high expectations and accountability for people in our program. If they are to successfully complete our program, they not only have their sobriety and their recovery in their hands, and in their hearts, they also have their felony dismissed from their record, which is an enormous barrier.
That's huge.
See, sounds like you guys are already aware of that. That's one of the #1 things Shannon and I work with is criminal history and how that affects folks. So this is a great program. Shannon and I work with strictly within the housing piece. We are housing case managers, and our job is to work with the homeless single adults and families in the drug court program. And we have a variety of different transitional programs. We have access to some vouchers called Shelter Plus Care, which offer case management and permanent housing in the community. And in general, networking with folks like these wonderful women up here on the panel to try to do what we can to get our folks housed. So that's what we do.
next we have Julie McFarland. Julie McFarland is Program Director for 211 Family Housing Connection, also Catholic Community Services.
Thank you. I'm Julie McFarland. My program falls under Catholic Community Services, and like Jillian mentioned, it's a very large agency providing many services to low-income and vulnerable folks. The program that I oversee is Family Housing Connection, and it's a new program as of April 2012. It's a coordinated entry program that it actually involves 80 different programs serving homeless families in King County. When they have an opening, they let us know, and we are meeting with families who are homeless in King County to refer them to the next available opening. So pre-Family Housing Connection, families would call 211, get a big list of programs, and have to call them individually and track the work that they have done. It's total chaos, and they're already in crisis.
And call them back every week or more.
Yeah, and all of them with different environments. So now, when a family calls 211 and identifies as a homeless family, they set up a meeting with Family Housing Connection and are connected with the system. We do that work on the back end so that they can work on other things that are important in their life, employment, education, healthcare, all of that stuff. So it's the first step in quite a bit of systems change that's happening in the family homelessness world, and it's been quite a year.
Thank you, Jess. We're really grateful to have you with us today. I know we also have a couple other people in the audience today. I want to welcome, and I want to say it's Mary.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth is here. Elizabeth, can you tell us something about the Safe Cars program that you
I coordinate the Safe Parking Community Network. I recruit congregations who have parking lots to provide space for people who are living in their vehicles. Compass Housing Alliance provides case management for the people in their vehicles. And we have had remarkable success, given the shortage of housing, getting people into more stable housing conditions. And we could use a lot more parking spaces, and I'm especially praying for congregations who can take oversized vehicles. We have no place to put people who are living in RVs. So keep that in your prayers.
And we have
parking
lots.
Yeah. We have a forum coming up in West Seattle on the 1st of February on the stages of homelessness. Y'all come.
Julie, you had something?
I was just going to promote the forum that Elizabeth just mentioned.
Yeah.
February 1st in the evening, and it's free dinner, right? Soup
Yeah.
and bread. And
Provided by all kinds of
Okay.
Oh.
At St. John's the
Baptist.
Okay, so at St. John the Baptist. What's
They
the
have a
date
parking
today?
lot.
February 1st. for
Dinner
providing
served at
a meal.
6.
So if you're in the congregation wants to do something to help, it's a great place to lend a hand. Very helpful. So let's go ahead and get started then. What we'd like to do next is to direct your attention to an 11-minute piece that we have from NBC News. It's about two families, and they're both dealing with homelessness. And the objective would be to allow our experts, I guess we can say, to view the film, and then we can bring them together to discuss what are the salient features regarding the causes of their homelessness, the barriers to getting rehoused, the challenges within the family, within the community, etc. And then lead that into a conversation where the rest of us can engage as well.
The tree was lit up just last night. City's packed with tourists. We keep hearing holiday shopping is roaring back this year. Everyone is hoping it's a sign of a more robust economy. But way too many American families got caught and are still trapped in the downturn. Ann Curry spent time with families who were supposed to have the American dream, educated, hardworking, with all the trappings of a middle-class life in America. But in a kind of slow-motion way, they have watched themselves become part of a new class of working homeless, something we last saw in the Depression 80 years ago. And as Ann Curry shows us tonight, these families are trying mightily to turn their lives back around.
It's an ordinary school day for 9-year-old Jillian Kennard and her sisters in Johnson City, Tennessee. The Pledge of Allegiance, band practice, a math class. But life for the Kennard sisters is anything but ordinary.
Hi guys, it's time to get up.
Every Sunday, their parents, Patrick and Cindy, wake them before the sun rises. They fold cots.
We still have some more packing to do.
And pack up their lives. Jillian makes sure the birdhouse she built out of popsicle sticks, glitter, and glue isn't left behind. And as evening approaches,
Yeah, we're in the right spot.
for the 11th time in 4 months, they make their way to a Sunday school classroom in another church for another week. It might not seem like much, but for the next 7 days, this is where they'll sleep. For the first time in their lives, the Kennard family is homeless.
That's right.
They are the new face of American homelessness. In the wake of the recession, experts say the U.S. stands at a historic juncture. The latest government data show the number of people in homeless families living in suburban and rural America rose nearly 60% during the depths of the Great Recession, an unprecedented surge. More than 1 million school children are now homeless, the most ever recorded. Children like the Kennard sisters, living a life of uncertainty and sometimes shame.
So the hardest part, people finding out. Sometimes when we're on our way to school, we have to write our friend like a church singer, and people can probably see that.
What made you not want to tell everybody else?
When I wanted everybody to laugh at me.
No one knew. You went to school every day. You played with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they went home, what were you thinking?
I felt happy for them because they had a house and I didn't.
But she does have her precious birdhouse.
Why do you love it so much?
Because it reminds me of the old house.
The Kennards were typical of many families across the country, working class people pursuing the American dream. They worked hard and built savings accounts. Both have college degrees. But perhaps the most surprising thing about the Kennards is that even now they are a working family. For the last 7 years, Patrick has worked a full-time job at a bank call center with benefits. And until recently, Cindy worked full-time as a director at a daycare center. Despite the recession, they were getting by.
We're not big spenders. We never have been. We just need the necessities of life.
But then came the unexpected. Patrick developed serious kidney problems. Even with health insurance, medical bills went into the thousands. Their car broke down repeatedly. Then Cindy quit her job because she couldn't afford childcare for her own kids.
It was just like a domino for you.
When we fell hard. And we fell fast.
They downsized from a spacious apartment to a smaller apartment here, but then couldn't afford the rent and were evicted.
Describe the moment.
I wanted to dig a hole and let somebody cover me up.
Jillian took the eviction notice especially hard.
I was scared because I love the house and I didn't want to leave it.
They didn't have relatives to stay with in the area, and they wanted to keep their family together.
We considered going to a campground.
Yeah.
But even camping supplies cost too much.
Then we decided that we would just live out of the van. Then we got repossessed. We didn't know where to go to then.
We're living paycheck to paycheck.
Paycheck to paycheck. There was nothing for savings. There was nothing for food. There was nothing for nothing.
And they were forced to make heartbreaking decisions.
One of the hardest things I ever had to do was to sell my wedding band. That ring on my finger meant the world to me.
Do you still have yours?
No. We needed food, and gas. So we pawned them.
They got $100 for both rings. Soon the reality of failing to provide for his children sent Patrick into despair.
They didn't do anything to deserve this. They didn't do anything. They're totally innocent.
It's almost too much to bear.
It was. I'm sorry.
Then they finally caught a break, getting shelter in those Sunday school classrooms, a program run by the Interfaith Hospitality Network. The Kennards' struggle to keep their family together is a fight Darlene Gaines knows well. It wasn't medical bills that triggered her family's downward spiral. She attributes it in part to divorce, another major cause of homelessness.
When I saw homelessness, I saw a bomb. Now when I see homelessness, I see my reflection.
Darlene also thought she had done everything right, even taking classes for her master's degree. And she's held a good job with the Veterans Administration for the last 15 years. She had savings, college and retirement accounts, and a comfortable suburban home for her 3 sons.
They had never worried about anything. They never had to go into the kitchen and look into empty cupboards. I lived a middle-class life all my life. That's all I knew. I dropped from middle class to no class.
As she struggled to cover her bills by herself, including her student loan, Darlene couldn't keep up with rising food and gas prices.
I just knew that I was drowning and I was doing everything possible to prevent from drowning. My greatest fear for my children was to take them out of an environment that they knew all their life.
You tried to prolong the life they knew, as expensive as it was becoming, because you didn't want to hurt them.
You hit the nail on the head.
After using her savings, she couldn't pay her mortgage, and a foreclosure letter soon arrived.
I opened up the letter and I began to read it. And the whole while, I'm in total disbelief.
With her 3 sons, 15, 16, and 17, Darlene faced the prospect of breaking apart her family because most shelters separate men and women for security reasons. And advocates say there are not enough shelters for the new wave of homeless families.
We have families that were coming in.
Sean Donovan is Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, which funds homeless programs across the country. What do you say to the families who are living out of their cars, who are living in laundromats, who essentially refuse to let their families be split apart by going into a shelter?
What I would tell them is nobody should have to live like that, and it's wrong.
He acknowledged to us that shelters, which for years served mainly single adults, must now use their funding differently to accommodate the rise in homeless families. And if they say that the funding, and a large amount of funding comes from HUD, that the funding is not there to support families, what do you say?
I absolutely believe, and the president has fought for, greater investment in homelessness.
Is there enough money being allocated for homeless families?
No, I'm not satisfied that we have the full amount of resources that we need, and we will continue to fight for more.
HUD did spend $1.5 billion in stimulus money on homeless prevention. Now Secretary Donovan says he has an ambitious new plan to reach families before they become homeless, like the Kennard family and Darlene's family.
And like on this side here, you see this bed, yours truly.
Is yours?
Yes.
After months of sleeping on her parents' floor, Darlene got lucky.
So this is our little space.
She found a rare, family-friendly shelter for the working homeless called Our House, where her boys could stay with her. If they had made them stay on the other side with the men, you wouldn't have stayed here?
No, I would have tried, something else. I didn't want us divided because emotionally, you have those moments where no one can fix it but Mom.
The shelter is also helping Darlene get back her financial footing, while her boys learn that no matter what their circumstances, they can never give up.
I'm constantly talking about grades. This is not the end for you. We're just passing through. So let us stay focused.
The Kennard sisters are also learning a lesson from homelessness, to overcome their shame, and for the first time, they are speaking about it publicly.
It's going to reach people, even people I don't know, who may have been in this situation or going into it, and maybe I'll be humiliated because a few times in school, but I'll get over that soon because we're not going to be in here that much very longer.
Not there for much longer because the Kennard family just got an unexpected slice of good fortune. The shelter has given them a grant to help with rent for up to 5 years. They expect to move into a 4-bedroom apartment in this building by Christmas. For Jillian, that will mean no more early mornings in dark parking lots. And maybe, at last, she'll be able to put down her birdhouse.
Let's hope they're doing better real soon. Tough story, but it's part of the story playing out across the country, and Ann promises to keep us updated on the families we just met.
So we had a chance to see 2 families, both of which facing homelessness and having different responses to both of their challenges. I guess I'd like to just open it up to whomever would like to speak first. What are some of the, I guess you might say, salient features that stand out as the crucial issues as why they became homeless? Thinking about your expertise.
Well, one of my first reactions when I saw that video is kind of the 2 triggering events for each family becoming homeless are things that could happen to any of us. An illness, a that led that first family into, the medical bills that started piling up, and before you knew it, they were behind on rent, and it wasn't, just a hop, skip, and a jump into the shelter, right? The other family, she experienced a divorce. That happens all the time. And I guess my reaction is neither one of those families should have ever been homeless to begin with. And it's kind of on a deeper level looking at our healthcare system and rising costs of healthcare and medications, and that nobody should become homeless because they have an illness and that they need to take care of themselves. Whereas the other family, a couple that experiences divorce, our costs of living, our costs of housing is so high that a woman who has a good job and an education, she works for the VA, can't afford to support her family. So I know that's kind of a broader level, maybe than necessarily pointing on the unmet need, but that was sort of my initial reaction to that video.
I think that's very, very true across the board, is that it's not usually just one piece, one incident. Families that come to us have had a series of things that have happened to them that have led them down the path to where they are in need of shelter services. And unfortunately, the systems are not in place enough to help people with the preventative piece. And I know that's something that's being talked about in King County as well, as ways of helping people before they get to shelter. But the reality is that unfortunately many, many people, and many more than we have space for, are in need due to the circumstances.
One of the things that struck me in this video that I see with almost every family that comes in is when they get to the point of going to a shelter, that's usually their very last resort. They have done everything else they know possible. They have used every friend and family member they know of. They've slept on their couches or on their floors. I've heard of families that have slept in sister-in-law's garages, even in the middle of winter. And when that doesn't work, then they move into their car, they stay in buses and laundromats, and they do everything they can to stay together. And shelter is usually the absolute last resort for a family because they don't want to put that stress on their children of separating mom and dad or older teeny boys into different shelters.
In our experience with the coordinated entry system, a family is eligible to get on the waiting list when they're within 30 days of becoming homeless, and they are responsible for calling us to update us on their situation. And we get calls at least weekly from most of the families with something that's changed. They were kicked out from where they were staying because they were doubled up with someone who has public housing, and if they get caught staying there, that person's going to lose their voucher entirely. That's a very common thing. So they go from doubled up, they were couch surfing a couple nights at different places. Then they're at Denny's during the evening where it's a 24-hour place. It gets worse and worse and worse, and there's not enough housing. So we see their progression from being 30 days away from being on the street to literally being on the street and still months away from being able to get housing in a shelter, on a bunk, in a gym, just very basic place with a roof over their head.
Yeah, the idea of waiting for shelter in King County, it's a 6-month, 8-month wait.
Yep.
So the idea that you're falling into homelessness and all that, if you recognize it 30 days ahead of time, a lot of times there's a lot of chaos in your family, so you don't necessarily recognize that 30 days out. And if you get on a list, you're still 6-8 months away from accessing shelters in our system right now. So that's where are you in those 6 to 8 months? What are you doing? Where are you going? And that's one thing we're seeing. And that's, in some ways, it's an organized system. It's a change for us, but there's just lack of affordable housing, lack of shelter. So even things like the family program that was going on for a while with churches housing families.
Family promises.
Family promises. It was, those are the kind of stopgap things that families really need. I mean, that there is no place to go with it. And the thing they point out there is boys, a lot of programs won't take boys over 12 years old because they see them as men. We know that's not the case. And our programs do, take boys up to 18. But I have moms who call me with a boy who's 19, and then does he come in? Does he not come in? Your funding is for women, and once they turn 18 legally, he's a man now. And then where does that child go? And so we've seen families still splitting up that want to stay together.
Yeah, the issue of teenagers in shelter systems is really tragic in that it has evolved to where a number of programs now do take teenagers, especially male teenagers, as part of the family unit. And that's critical, you know, the woman with the 3 teenage boys, and not wanting to have them somewhere else. Well, of course not, they're a family unit, and, you know, at Sacred Heart and a number of other programs, you know, we look at families as they present to us. You know, if we have a family coming in, 1 or 2 parent family, can be made up of, you know, a mother and a father, or a multi-generational family, or a gay and lesbian family, and we accept them as their family unit with children. And that's one of the struggles we see. We serve single fathers, and when we get a single father in, you know, one of the things that comes from him is the difficulty he has navigating a system, you know, with children, because of the stereotype that you know, single mothers are the ones that need to be served. But there's this other, you know, facet of family homelessness that needs to be remembered and addressed too.
Julie, could you tell us something, since you are the program director for the client coordination list that we have for 211? What are the numbers that we're facing in county around that?
So since April of 2012, we've met with just about 2,700 families. We've had maybe 700 openings for housing. A lot of those are emergency shelter and motel vouchers. So within our system, we have everything from emergency shelter to motel vouchers to transitional housing, where people can stay 18 months to 2 years. We have some 5-year housing and some permanent supportive housing, but that longer-term housing is extremely limited. We do have some rental assistance, but most of it requires that a family have pretty significant income. So there's a lot of barriers in place for each program, and a lot of those are barriers that our funders put in place. And then on top of that, as programs, we have to put some rules in place to ensure safety. So there's a lot of barriers for folks to get into housing. Even me thinking, if I became homeless today and there was an opening available for a single person, I wouldn't be able to get in because I don't have my birth certificate readily available. I'd have to hunt around for my social security card. There's so many documents you have to have. And as you're downsizing, especially as a family, you're downsizing and trying to get everything to fit in a few suitcases. There's some things you're just going to leave behind. And a lot of times, there's families that don't have the necessary documents for every person in their family. And that's 6 weeks at a minimum, depending on what they need.
And the cost on top of that to
Yeah.
get those items. And if you're from a different state, and trying to get your birth certificate or social security card, it's
Or different country.
or different
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. Ethiopia, Mexico.
Or if you were adopted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple more numbers. About 1/3 of the families that we've seen out of those 2,700 were young families with head of household between 18 and 25. 1/3 of them are experiencing or have recently experienced domestic violence. I think it's 15% of them speak, their primary language is not English, so an additional level of barriers there. That's all I can think of at the moment. Is that what you're looking for?
Sure.
Okay.
So we're looking at 2,700 have been pursuing assistance, 2,000 have been turned away.
Yep.
Since
They just haven't
April
gotten up to the
2012.
list yet to even be offered something.
So turn away is not the exact right word, they just haven't reached the front of the list yet.
Yeah.
And the challenges they have, I mean, like Alan, we work with people who have, you know, they have felony convictions, certain, like you were talking about funding, keeps
Yeah.
felons out of some programs. So if you have a woman or a man, you know, 1 felony, let alone 6 or 7 felonies, that can be clean sober so long, you know, it could be 6 months, it could be a year. Different programs, depending on where their funding is coming from, you have all these weird little requirements that you put in. So even if they're getting maximum support from drug court, they may not qualify, which makes them a good risk, if the program's at risk or whatever. The rules may keep them out. And so those people are the ones that stay on the top of your list forever, trying to find a place that will open up that can take 7 felonies and a drug history and domestic violence. Evictions, yeah. Because, the evictions are a huge problem. Yeah. When they try to maintain it, they go stay to the end and they get evicted, and then no other landlord wants to look at them.
Speaking of barriers, when I see that video, I mean, I think that those are folks that, you know, as we've experienced this great recession, there's just more attention being paid. You know, the numbers are greater, the demand is high, but the supply has never been there. Even in the dot-com era, and, you know, we live in this very affluent area, the shelters are always full. The wait lists are always long. And speaking of barriers too, those families that we saw, those aren't actually the kinds of families that Shannon and I work with, and look how much they're struggling. Those are the high-functioning, educated, you know, employment history, their families together, they're all together themselves. And we've got families that have significant issues with mental health, with addiction, criminal histories, they may have CPS involvement, extreme poverty, you know, little to no education. You know, someone with a high school education is sometimes a rare thing in our office. Just kind of trying to conceptualize the problem and the scope that it really is. I think that's just a very small sample that you saw today, and being open to working with all families, I think, is really, really important if we really want to talk about ending, you know, the homelessness in our community, ending it for all families.
Alice, can you tell us what CPS is?
Oh, CPS is Child Protective Services. Families that have had issues with maybe neglect or abuse, or a lot of times it's related to addiction, and have the state involved in their family and possibly have a child removed from their home.
And the other thing CPS does, if there's domestic violence, they're getting better about it. They used to take the children into custody, charging them up with failure to protect, even though the abuser is the one who's creating the issue. So, but there are times where if the family falls into homelessness, the woman flees, she can't get stable housing, the kid has issues, the child is put in foster care. All the mom needs is stable housing to get that child back. And it's not there.
Keeping her from reuniting with her child that needs her.
Which keeps the kid in trauma.
Yes.
I heard a couple of things. One of the things I heard was this notion of prevention. And you guys are describing having the families who are already in the chaos of homelessness. So what role do your agencies play in the realm of preventing homelessness?
And somewhat around the parent agency, we have landlord-tenant lines where we have funding available to avoid eviction, to avoid mortgage default. I mean, some of those things, but they're good programs, they're stopgap. We're also chaining that with a financial boot camp, kind of teaching people how to budget their money, working with them on triaging out what the important bills are to pay and how to get some savings going and those kind of things. So that's some of the eviction prevention, and you know, the money's there for that. We have, like Julie's talked about with her program, can refer people into a program where there's rent subsidy. So you could be working, you're losing your housing, but you actually have income coming in, and you just need to get in. First class security can run $2,000–3,000. So if once you've lost your housing, to come up with $2,000 or $3,000 to get in and kind of start paying again takes some time. So there's some rent subsidy programs, but like as you said, they already have to have a pretty high income.
Yeah, and no evictions, and what's gonna get them into housing with a market rate landlord really quickly, and that's pretty heavy area.
Yeah, well, at our day center, you know, the majority of who we see are women who are already homeless, but we do see a lot of women who are on that edge of, you know, about to be homeless or formerly homeless and afraid to fall back into that. And so providing the support within the community that they need to know that they're not in that alone, so they don't have to face these issues by themselves. A lot of times, particularly as women, they try to do it all themselves. I'm going to take care of my family, which is a really noble thing. But in this environment, it's almost impossible to do it by yourself. And so creating that sense of support and encouragement for the women. And then also just the practical things of somewhere to do laundry for free is a big thing I can say if you know lots of money during the month. And then providing other resources for clothing, for interview outfits as they're going out into interviews for jobs and housing sites. And then, you know, the safe meals, the safe and healthy meals every week that maybe they can bring their kids to, so they're not going out and spending their money at McDonald's or at the grocery store. They can come in and sit in community and have meals there. So providing those what seem like small resources can make a difference in the bigger picture.
With the prevention stuff, it's a really hot topic right now within family homelessness, but it's also in a very difficult place because all of the funding is so outcome focused, and it's very difficult to prove to a funder that you actually prevented this family from becoming homeless. There's rarely any way you can actually prove that. So I think funders are reluctant right now to pour more money into prevention until they find a better way to try to measure that. And that's been so frustrating. frustrating. Especially for those folks on our wait list that aren't yet literally homeless on the streets, who maybe they could be doubled up and pay rent and stay in that housing. There's definitely a market for it.
Absolutely. And to add to that, you know, the issue then comes up is that there's, for the people experiencing homelessness right now, we don't have enough money and we don't have enough resources to provide people with a safe place, given the numbers in King County. And then we look at adding prevention dollars is what we would need to do, is add and not take away from the already very limited resources. Unfortunately, sometimes people look at a solution as, well, we can just shift the money and that will, you know, make this new and improved. But the reality, you know, like Julie was talking about earlier, the numbers, we don't have enough places for people to be tonight. We have women and children and families sleeping out there on the streets, literally, you know, and, you know, in parking lots, etc. So we need to figure out, you know, the whole spectrum of the need is so big.
Well, there's never one answer. I mean, for every single family that comes through any of our doors, there's that many stories and reasons and causes for homelessness and ways to move forward. You know, there's never one answer. And so having the diversity of programs and options out there for families is so vital. And then to realize that, you know, that we can work towards the longer goal, like Jillian was saying, of, you know, prevention, but we have to do something tonight too, and that's so important. And that's what we at Maryspace have been trying to do in opening these 3 shelters in the last 18 months, is making sure that every family that is sleeping in their cars has the option to come inside. And part of that is done through partnerships with faith communities. We use that model that you saw in the video, the Interfaith Hospitality Network, and that used to be Family Promise that was operated here in West Seattle. We took that model and ran with it, and now we operate it in downtown and North Seattle, and we're looking to continue to expand those faith communities so that we have enough places for families tonight while they're waiting to move forward.
Safety is such a key. It really is. I think we all see that, in that we want to make sure that everybody has, if not a safe room, at least a safe place.
And women who are experiencing domestic violence should recognize what's going on so that keeps them stuck. Because to leave, there's all the dangers of the domestic violence, and it's the highest risk time that there's no place to go. They're stuck in that situation. And it's just, the danger just keeps increasing and increasing. And they're, right now in King County, there's so few beds. I mean, we've got 5, well, one program is kind of in and out of it, but, so there's just, you know, there's not enough space at all. I mean, and most programs are really small, you know. So for DV, they can call shelters directly and stay out of this other system until they can move on more stable housing. But even then, you know, we turn away anywhere from 20 to 30 families a day. A day.
So where did they go?
Where are they going? They end up at Maryspace sometimes. They are literally on the streets and they're doubled up. And in that whole time, they're not getting the DV services, the counseling and support. And if the partner is stalking them, which happens frequently, they end up going to a lot of women.
And sometimes they'll take their first bed anywhere. And so there'll be families that come to us saying, you know, we found a domestic violence shelter in Idaho that will accept us. Can you give us bus fare to get there? And, you know, so then you have to weigh what's more important for this family, to stay where they have, you know, support, or to go where they're going to be safe. And you have to leave that up to the family. But sometimes they're traveling out of state just to get a 30-day bed.
And the DV community, we talk to each other. We have a computer program that does all of Western Washington, and we can see who's got space. But frequently it's Washington County or Thurston County or even out in Grace Harbor County. And, you know, so to say to a woman who's got 3 kids, I can get you a bed out in Aberdeen tonight. How do you get there? How do you get back if your kids are at school? If you have medical issues going on, if you've got a family program, then that means uprooting all of that to leave to have 30 days of safety. And say, well, you can keep trying to get back to us, but you know, it may not happen. And that's one of the issues.
Julie, could you tell us something about your shelter provides a unique service that they actually have men involved in single fathers? Can you tell us how you've been able to accommodate that?
So we're in the old convent of Sacred Heart Church down in the lower Queen Anne. So for our families, we have single rooms that used to be the old convent rooms as a community space. So with families, we have typically, you know, 2 bunk beds. So therefore, we can have people having their own personal space. We can have single fathers and male-female partners in our shelter space together. It's one of the things that does come up sometimes is that traditionally people think of shelters as being women only. And there's an absolute need for that. There's an absolute need for that within the domestic violence system. And, but there's this flip side is that men also are currently homeless with their families. And given our sleeping arrangements, we've been able to have that work out for us. And also being able to accommodate teenagers within our space. Maybe living together in community is hard under any circumstances. So there's many bumps that come up, but it certainly is more based on having too many people in a small space and being under stress. It's very, it's hard to be homeless.
When you say teenagers, do you mean like homeless teenagers on their own without their parents?
No, we mean teenagers as part of the family unit.
No. Are there any, within the family homeless service providers, is there what about services for homeless teenagers on their own?
Right, yeah, there are a number of programs out there for homeless teens. It unfortunately also is underfunded and not enough access.
And there are specialized programs like Teen Moms. But yeah, there's very few beds. And so Julie's program gets some adolescent referrals. But for kids, like street kids, if you're like street youth, University District Youth Shelter,
so
that's one of the big programs. But it's real hard. Those kids, they're not calling and screening in. Yeah, they're more like youth drop-in centers. That's true. They're chaos. It's kind of a whole different kind of chaos. But for the teen moms, there are programs out there. But one of the interesting frustrations is some of the programs are way far away.
Yeah.
And to get a young woman who is connected to downtown Seattle to Bonneville is like another world. And so I think they're resistant because they're moving away from their friends and their school and all those other things. And that's one of the things is matching people to services. Sometimes services are available, but way Maple Valley or and then you get back to that, how if you disrupt all the support services in place, they're making a really tough choice.
One more follow-up question. So there's no way then for homeless teenage kids to get in line to qualify for transitional housing?
No, there is.
Yeah, there's youth transitional housing, but it's not part of the family housing.
It's a separate system altogether. So the system that Julie works in is just for families, and then there's actually an entirely different youth and young adult system of shelters and transitional housing that operates on its own. It's going to be doing a new kind of coordinated entry system like this soon as well.
So within the next year, 18 to 24-year-old young adult programs for single youth will be a part of a coordinated system, and then a phase 2 probably a year later is going to include possibly under 18 beds. Yeah.
If you're speaking from the audience, loud and clear, please, so Joe can catch your voice. Thank you.
So earlier I heard a mention of 80 possible places of shelter in King County or something. My experience just listening to all of you talk about the range of services and we're just really talking about family homelessness now. I'm like overwhelmed just trying to kind of figure out where would a person even start? I mean, is 211 the best thing to do? Is to make that phone call and to then begin to unravel which of the 80 places they should be calling?
Now the Family Housing Connection does that work with the 80 programs, letting us know when they have an opening, we know what their eligibility criteria is and all of that. So the family doesn't have to worry about that anymore, but they still have to wait because there isn't an increase in the number of housing units available. So when the family calls 211, we set up a meeting with Family Housing Connection, and we meet with them for about an hour, and we do a housing assessment where we get to know what their housing needs are and their housing barriers. So we get to know their preferences and the areas that are going to work. A lot of folks have childcare in an area, and it's so hard to get into somewhere else that they've got to be really close to that childcare to make everything work. So that we're trying to find housing that's near childcare or school that they're connected to or whatever it is. So we do that work around what their needs are and what their barriers might be to try to figure out what they'd be eligible for. So they no longer have to do that.
You think the average person walking down the street even knows what 211 is?
I think the For people who have accessed the system before, 211 is fairly common knowledge, but if you're one of those folks that is just falling into this situation for the first time, probably not. Yeah.
The Family Housing Connection, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the programs themselves have been doing a lot of advocacy and outreach to try and let families know what's available and what 211 is and how to get into it. And I know that the very first question everybody asks at Marysville, not just staff, but the women in general. Have you called 211? Have you called 211? You know, especially when they say they have kids. You know, call 211. They're going to get you on the list. They're going to help you. And so that's just, unfortunately, it's a lot of word of mouth. But the more that places like us and congregations, so if you see a family outside, you know, even just saying to them, have you called 211? Have you tried to access those resources? A lot of it's word of mouth, but it does spread pretty quickly.
Yeah. Speaking of word of mouth, it just made me think of something right now. Seattle Housing Authority is about to open their wait list for Section 8 for the first time next month in 5 years. So speaking of word of mouth, I'm sure that's something everybody up here knows, and is telling every single person, every client that calls 211, every single family that walks through our doors. But the reality is, I mean, we're talking about subsidized housing with a voucher that you can use in the private market and pay third income. So this is kind of like the thing that you want to have. This is like what everyone's kind of trying to get. But the issue is they haven't opened their wait list since 2008. They're opening for the first time in 2013. They're going to do a lottery, and they are going to literally pull 2,000 households out of the lottery, and those are the lucky ones who get to just go on the wait list. They're not going to move in tomorrow. They're going to be placed on the wait list, and they are still not done placing people from the 2008 lottery. So this is such big news for Shannon and I that we've got flyers everywhere. We're going to try to get everybody in there and hope that just a handful of the families that we work with might get their name drawn. But this, I guess I'm just trying to paint a picture of just the reality of the situation.
The last time they had a lottery, I think it was between 7,000 and 8,000 people applied in 2 weeks.
Yeah. They had
And only
4,000
2,000.
available. 4,000 available in 2008, 2,000 available this time.
Yeah, right. I think it was only 2,000 last time. 2,000.
At the training they did last week, they said 4. But they're expecting 20,000 people to apply.
High demand.
Brand new anybody.
Do each of your organizations have separate funding sources?
Probably some of it is the same. So like we're we put together a HUD, HUD money and VAWA money, which is Violence Against Women, and that's quickly going away. And so then there's county money and state money and city money, United Way money. So your budget usually isn't just one funding source, but a bunch. And I'd say that most programs get it from different places.
Yeah, our program is kind of unique in that we don't get any government funding.
Catholic resources, right?
Yeah, so we strictly go to the private market, to businesses, to civic organizations, and then individual donors and faith communities.
And did one of you say something about the Gates Foundation? Is that one of them?
I'm funded by the Gates Foundation.
Gates Foundation.
Yeah.
So is Homeward Bound. Project Homeward, well, what we're doing today through Homeward Bound through Alki UCC is a grant that we've been awarded through the Gates Foundation. Andy, you have a question?
This may not be possible, but I was wondering if you give a brief history description of Section 8, like what caused the waitlist to close? I know this is all funding. Why is it opening again? The list, where the funding needs to come from.
I don't know if I'm necessarily the right person to ask.
Section 8 is a HUD money that comes down as one form of
Federal.
federal. And so each housing authority in the country can access it. And it comes in different forms, like the FUPS, and Shelter Plus Care. There are different forms of specialized vouchers to get people into housing, as well as just general shelter funding, transitional funding. They all have different criteria, but each housing authority can apply. And it's distributed across the country, and so the feds are determining how many you get. And then within that housing authority, they determine how many. Some of the Section 8s end up being used for a specialized program, one called Family Unification Program, where people with healthcare crisis or their children going through CPS can use those. There's usually 20 to 40 of those set aside out of the big a big batch. So it's not like you're housing all those families. But there's all these separate little programs, but it's federal money. The housing authorities locally that determine how to give it out. Yeah, and there's always been a demand. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's always been a much larger wait list. And the reason they went to lottery was years ago, King County opened it up one time. Because King County Housing Authority also has it, and they almost had riots outside their office, or back in
So there's no comparable state or county subsidized housing,
No.
Section 8, if you
No.
want subsidized housing programs,
No.
all federal dollars.
It's also.
Yeah, that's correct. We have 3 local housing authorities that have different vouchers coming: King County Housing Authority, Seattle Housing Authority, and Renton Housing Authority. Renton's pretty small, but.
And I know Shannon said that there's going to be an educational talk about advocacy, and that's going to be happening here at UCC in a couple weeks or so.
February 17th.
February 17th. And that's the perfect tie-in to that. Governmental money comes down based on what's available, and, we all have an obligation, or at least I believe we have an obligation, to keep putting that back out there, that the needs of the poor and the needs of the people that are homeless are so much ongoing, that our legislators need to hear that. We need to hear that this is important, that we need more Section 8s, and we need more shelters.
Shannon?
Speaking of that subject, there's 2 advocacy opportunities in February in Olympia. So I would like to know from each of you, what is the message we go with? What is it that we say to our legislatures, to our government? I mean, yes, there's a housing need, but to me, it's like, what are like the top 3 things? If I went there and said, I need A, B, and C for you to do for these people. You can each answer individually.
Can I just give the context for that? So we're talking about the Housing and Homeless Advocacy Day that's taking place Monday, February 11th. And we're also organizing folks, part of our Homeward Bound program, will be helping to provide transportation so we can all go together. But this is what you're talking about, correct? How do
Yes.
you help us be prepared to go to this event and have some guidance?
So we have that event, and we have our advocacy panel on the 17th. And then I think after that, on the 20th, maybe, there's another advocacy day. So there's this whole kind of 2-week period where we'll be going down there in a big van, hopefully full of people, to talk to our legislatures and our government about what's important. So money, I hear that message loud and clear.
Right, I think that there are a number of agencies that that's really what they focus on. And Shannon can put out, I'm sure on these flyers, the websites that talk about people in poverty situations and the specifics about what legislation applies to people that we serve and the educational piece that goes around with that.
Can you think of anything based upon what you know directly, the people you're serving today? Like, what's the kind of, how important would it be for us to get that message to the people you serve Tuesday? Tomorrow's the day off, perhaps. Tuesday morning, you get to work, you've got a caseload in front of you with 12 different crises. How can we get those 12 different crises from this congregation to the folks in Olympia? What's the kind of things they need to hear about those?
Reinstating healthcare cuts. I mean, just if you do that first one, there's been huge healthcare cuts. What the state can cover, now they're in a budget crisis and we get that. But things like, so if adults no longer have dental, vision, mental health cuts. I mean, so those are the things that then add to their homelessness. If you're not getting your meds because you're into their mental health issues, if you can't get basic healthcare needs met, I've had a half a dozen women in the last 6 months have major abscesses, faces swollen, and the only choice is to see if they can get a free dental clinic that will pull their tooth. I mean, there's no restorative work being done anymore. And one of the young women, I had a young woman who was, she's 23, just had all her teeth pulled. In his really adventures, but because they couldn't do all the repair that needed to be done, because she doesn't qualify for dental care. And so she found somebody who would do that for her. So now at 23, she has dentures. So just advocating for, reinstating health care for people and single adults, which you work with single adults even have more brutal cuts. Moms, because they have moms who are connected with their kids still have some other healthcare options that single adults never have. That's one of the huge things.
You know, and I would say that along those same lines is to keep in the forefront that everybody deserves a safe home. Everybody deserves, you know, families and singles who are homeless deserve somewhere that's theirs, that they can go and know that night that they're going to be safe, and keeping that in the forefront of legislators' minds, that poverty is here, that families are homeless, and that we have an obligation as a community to keep fighting back, to make sure that that is not forgotten.
All of you just work with families, right?
So with my program at Sacred Heart, we work with families and we work with single women. So we have a capacity for 6 single women, and one of our rooms was converted in the beginning to serve single women as well.
Okay, what about people on drugs and alcohol who are just wandering around? Besides Union Gospel Mission, where can they go?
Catholic Community Services has a lot of programming for single adults. DESC, Downtown Emergency Service Center, is a large agency that's doing a lot of advocacy and a lot of programming for those single adults that you're seeing
With the
downtown.
housing,
Yeah.
there actually are a lot of good programs out there, and there's a lot of money now going into the veterans programs, and there's new programs being developed for vets.
But you don't hear about them, and these people are out there sleeping in doorways, trying to find food.
Yeah. And I would say there's actually been a new program that's similar to the family coordinated entry for adults that actually came out a little before, called Client Care Coordination. And that was actually funded primarily by the Gates Foundation, and it is specifically for chronic homeless, very high vulnerable, sort of the folks that you're speaking of, the visible homeless on the street. And it is a large range of permanent housing using a model called Housing First. A lot of the housing continuum that we have in our area is kind of designed that you go into a shelter, then you go into transitional housing, and then you eventually get permanent housing. Well, this is a new approach specifically for that group of people, where you take somebody who is on the street, maybe in addiction, maybe psychotic, with a lot of barriers, very high need, and put them right into an apartment that has case management, an apartment that's just for that population, has case management, 24-hour care, rules and some expectations, with the idea that if you stabilize somebody, that eventually those other issues can be worked on. And there's actually a lot of options right now for that group of people. We don't even have that for the families actually at all.
Can you define that group? What's that group of people?
I'm talking about chronic single adults that are on the street.
Mental health.
Can you define chronic for her?
Chronic homelessness is defined by being homeless for 1 year or multiple, more than 3 times in the past 3 or 4 years. And that means you have to be on the street for a period of 1 year or longer consecutively to be considered chronic homeless.
I was just wondering about the scale of the Housing First, about how many rooms or beds are in existence right now.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I want to say it's 80 or more. No, it's more than that, actually. It's more than that. Yeah, I think it's 1,000. 1,000 that was just funded through Gates. They're starting to slowly put together. Sorry, we do families more.
Well, I just read, I think it was in the book that some of us read here in church about that Housing First, because, and I'm wondering, how would we support that? The only reason I'm thinking about health, because like Eileen Cody is one of our representatives, she's very, very hot on healthcare, so I feel like how would we move her more, but I don't know, but I mean, as far as like a way that, this Housing First thing, how would we support that, or as an individual, or as a...
Well, Housing First is an approach that's being used for the single adult community, and to be honest, it's an approach that's not totally being accepted, I think, for the families.
It's being used with families. It is the trend. I always say it's the flavor of the month. That's not totally sarcasm. It's not one size fits all. There are families that can do that and take off running. And then,
And there's some that
and so there are
can't.
some vouchers, we're talking about Section 8 vouchers that are being used for that. Not all of them, but then as Jillian said, then you take away from those other vouchers, you know, so then you take, so some of that money has been moved into the Housing First model. That is the trend to do it, to try to interrupt the homelessness, and so if they're falling into homelessness, what can you do to get them back in? That would be doing the rental support, when I said that a family can get the rental assistance, so that they immediately go back into housing and don't fall into the system. Other families, and some of the families you're working with, that we're working with, people with mental health and drug addiction and safety issues and a lot of legal issues like domestic violence. Sometimes you actually need that stop along the way to get stabilized because it's too hard to do in the community. If you left BB and he's stalking you, you're not going to get another apartment right away because he might just come and get you evicted one more time. We see women who got the guy showed up 2, 3, and 4 times. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Housing First works in a lot of cases, but not in every case.
The majority of people on our list, the majority of families do not need subsidized permanent housing. They need help right now for a shorter amount of time to get back on their feet, and then they'll be self-sufficient and good to go.
Yeah.
It's a smaller percentage of those families that really, truly need that really long term.
Intensive services around. But the thing about the wet model too, I don't know if you guys hear about wet housing where people are allowed to do, most shelters and transition programs have no drug, no alcohol policy. You're using, you go, and you're back out on the street. DESC opened a building where people can use. They're not encouraging them to use, but they're not going to make them homeless. And they put services outside there, so they're doing the Housing First model. Move them in, have case management there, social workers, medical care. And what they found is it really has saved the taxpayer. So any doubting, person who's out to Olympia, it saves money.
And use decreases over time.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, use decreases over time, but also the use of so the big thing is the use of the emergency rooms, the police services, all the other services that cost money.
But that's single, those are
Single,
single, those are not
right.
family, those are not family, there's no family wet houses.
No.
I always think it's important to get that out.
Right,
Yeah.
that's not
There's-
something
yeah,
I think
there-
that anyone's
yeah, there's not-
encouraging.
There's not a lot, and there's nobody's encouraging people to stay drunk and stay
Folks, we've asked them to stay with us until 1:30. We've got 1:25. I was hoping that maybe you could each take a moment or two and share with us how you think our congregation could help your agency with the solution towards ending family homelessness. Maybe it's a big question. Maybe you can kind of think about how this group of people here could be part of your solution.
Our agency, the parent agency, which is called Solid Ground, has a program called SPAN, Statewide Poverty Action Network. So when you were talking about advocacy, we have people in Olympia all the time that are doing that. And they're also a grassroots organization that reaches out all over the state to organize people. They have, you can just sign up on their website for their emails. You can get more involved. They have community meetings and they do envelope stuffing. I know this church has been active in a lot of stuff like that, whether it's, doing phone banks and all that. They organize that. They organize all kinds of lobby days in Olympia. So it's easy. I mean, you can go to the website and look out and sign up, and you get almost daily emails from them. And they will let you know what's going on, what are the hot button issues that are impacting poverty in the state. So that's the easiest thing to do. From that little bit of involvement, if people want to be involved on a personal level, we always are looking for volunteers in our program, the tutoring in particular. We have like 65, 70 kids at any given time. Tutoring is huge for our kids in terms of having another adult. Your mother's in crisis, she's kind of, I shouldn't say checked out, but just overwhelmed. You have an adult that comes in with you every week and helps you with real basic stuff. I'm talking about if they're 5 years old, you're reading books with them. If they're 16 years old, you might be doing mathematics with them. So if you have an interest in an age group and you really want to have that personal involvement, we have tutors for kids from 5 to 18 years old. We even have tutors for our moms that are doing GED. So we are always looking for bodies to do that. That's a real, kind of personal commitment. And My example, you talked about whether we had successes, and I think about, we have 4 kids that have gone to medical school. I mean, I've been doing it long enough. But all 4 of them had tutors, and I always think that's a that gave them that stability, and you've got it. So you can be involved from the getting an email and writing your local representative to direct person action.
It's very true. You know, advocacy is the key, and I know that this congregation has a social justice heart, which is really important. So finding ways to educate yourselves about what's happening within the community, what's happening with people in poverty and in homelessness situations is key. And then looking forward to say, in what ways can, you know, a congregation together work, such as working with the neighborhood family promise piece when it was here, and helping to house families that were homeless. And I'm sure that there's going to be more discussion around, you know, what else can be done. Within Sacred Heart, we have, you know, as everybody does, many opportunities for people to come in and do hands-on volunteering, whether it be one-time projects, like we have groups coming in, a couple groups coming in on MLK Day to do some cleaning projects. We have daily volunteers coming in to help with the running of the shelter, answering the door, answering the phone, unlocking doors, doing various things, to our children's program that operates 5 nights a week with volunteers coming in and interacting with the children, having games and doing things, and cooks who come in 7 days a week when we're lucky and cook dinner for the families that serve us. So, you know, I think that there's many different ways that people can get involved, both, as Chris was saying, with writing letters to coming in and working with people one-to-one in a shelter program to working within your congregation.
I know at Mary's Place, of course, we can always use volunteers at our day center. That can be a one-on-one, or they can be a group activity. You can come every week, or you can come once a year. But our biggest need right now that we're looking for is to add congregations to our shelter model. Looking for congregations that can commit to hosting our families 4 times a year, 1 week a quarter, to bring the families into your building, to feed them dinner, to play games, but give them that safe place to sleep at night, and then bring them back to us in the morning so that we can continue the work to help move them forward. Right now we have 16 congregations in King County that are working together to provide this shelter model, and we still have holes in our calendar that we're still trying to fill. And when we have holes in our calendar, it means that we're using what little funding we have at Mary's Place to put them in hotels, rather than putting them out in the community with people who can love and care and encourage them. So if that's something that your congregation is interested in, please let me know, because we're definitely looking for more congregations to host.
So at King County Drug Court, it's a little tricky because we are a county, and so my first answer would be, it would be great to just have monetary donations to help with things like application fees and deposits and first and last rent, because that's just such a tricky one, but we don't really have any way of receiving that kind of money. So I guess my answer would be just supporting these kinds of organizations, because that's what we rely on when we're making our referrals into the community for our families. And just being open-minded and aware of the various barriers that families are facing, and that criminal history can be really challenging. And in our program in particular, we're asking people to do 15 to 24 hours a week of obligations for the court. So that's a lot to maintain if you have to work and get your kids to school and to daycare. I mean, we're asking a lot of people. There's certainly a reward at the end, which is that they aren't going to go to prison, but it's a huge obligation. Doing our program is like having a part-time job, and trying to juggle that with being homeless is very hard. So anything that you could do to help any of the homeless agencies in our community would be inadvertently assisting the families in drug court.
So for coordinated entry, I would echo what Liz said about adding congregations that can take people in. We have families that call us every day with nowhere to go, and they don't have a car most of the time, so they don't even have the opportunity to be able to lock that door and just stay together. It's literally, we're telling them what the 24-hour businesses are that they can go, and of course they can't sleep there, so they're staying up all night with their kids. So I would say if we could get more congregations to open up their doors to folks so they could have a place to stay, that would be huge. A lot of communities in our country have a legal right to shelter, and we don't have that here, but I think we have a moral obligation, and if we can see more of a movement there to ensuring that everyone
has at least a roof over their head every night, that would go a long way. But we're pretty far from that at this point. So we need more churches and faith-based communities to jump on board and help.
Before we finish, just to let you know, folks, we have behind us on the table back here flyers and information about upcoming events. Please make them available to you. We'd like to make sure we keep this conversation moving forward, that we're active and engaged, and we don't end right here. We'd like to also say thank you very much for coming. We'd like to finish, though. This is a church. This is a worship community. And Homeward Bound is part of the larger Faith and Family Homelessness Project. So we'd like to end, if possible, with Diana Darling, our pastor here at UCC, ending us and sending us off with a prayer.
You know, I'm kind of that kumbaya girl. These can we gather in a circle or something? Without feeling too kumbaya, you know.
That's how we do it here.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
And really thank you all for coming. And thank Shannon for a wonderful today. Oh God, we thank you for the gifts and energy and passion that these women bring to their work. And we pray for all the people that they serve. I'm so reminded today that when we complain so often that we don't know where to find you, it is so clear that you choose to spend your time in a laundromat overnight. You be found in a shelter. You be found in a room where someone's doing intake alongside a little girl who's ashamed that she doesn't have a home. So keep us listening to those stories and keep us willing to move our feet to find you where you are. Bless us in our continued work and understanding and in serving. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you for coming.
One more thing, we also have a Facebook page.
Wow.
It's online. And we post all the information on all of this and lots of other things, all our events and everything there.
Thanks for lunch.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, just to know
Yeah, they didn't give them an option of, that would be different.